The first thing we're going to do is add a little bit of motion to this photograph, as if the camera was panning across the scene. So what we can do is basically do a position animation of the background. But if we do that and we move the background from side to side, our dog is left in the middle, floating there. So to lock the dog to the grassy hill, so if we move the grassy hill, what do we have to do? We can parent it to the grassy hill. So now if we take the pick whip for the dog layer and attach it to the grassy hill, when we move the grassy hill from left to right, it moves as well. And the shadow, since it's attached to the dog, also moves. So now with that all set up, let's set a position for our starting point, and let's maybe just move it over to the side. And then let's go to the end of our composition and drag to the left. So if we play through this, we get a little subtle motion, and I love that subtle motion. I don't really need to see the dog right now, and it's taking a lot of bandwidth from my computer, so just to make things speed up, I'm going to turn off those layers. So cool, we got a little bit of motion. But in a natural environment, if you were looking at, if you're sitting on this hill, this tree wouldn't be completely still. There would be a little bit of wind. You might see a little rustling in the grass down below, a little bit of movement in the leaves. So let's add some movement. To add motion to something that is still, we will use the puppet pin tool. First, let's duplicate the grassy hill. And the reason is just so that if I do something to this layer, I can always go back and delete it. And it just makes it easier to manipulate the puppet pin area. So choose the puppet pin tool and now start placing pins around these branches. So I'll put one here, and again, make sure that you have this grassy hill layer selected, and then here, then also along here. And I'll explain why in just a second. Maybe here and here. If you press U on your keyboard, you find the keyframes for all of the puppet pins that we've selected or added. And we have this puppet with the mesh and all of these pins. And so what is happening is we've told After Effects that at this point, we want these pins to be here. Let's zoom in. So let's zoom in on these leaves so we can see a little bit better. Okay, so what happens when we move one of these pins? So let me go forward in time. So we're creating a new keyframe. Use the selection tool, and I move this. See what happens? The entire photo kind of warps. If I actually zoom out, you'll see that the entire photo itself is warping. And we don't want that. We just want this area of the photo to move. So to do that, we're going to create a mask. And we could have done this first, but I just wanted to show you how that works. So let me just create a mask around these branches, like so, and just around the edge of this branch as well. Okay, complete our mask. So if we turn off our bottom layer, this is what we're working with. I always like adding a little bit of feathering. So press F on your keyboard and increase the feathering just so it's a little bit more natural when it's blended with the image in the background. Okay, back to our pin tool. Press U on the keyboard. What we want to do is move all of these keyframes to the very beginning of our video clip. Then we'll go forward, and this has got to be very subtle. Let me delete this one that I had created. And let's just move these pins from side to side. So now, because it's masked out, the entire image doesn't move. Just move it just ever so slightly and go forward, and we'll move it back just ever so slightly. The reason why I put in all of these other pins is think of them as joints of your body and think of these as your arm. If I didn't have these pins set up, then the entire image would move, but these are locked in place. So you have your shoulders locked in place. Here is your shoulder, here is your elbow, here is your hand or your wrist. So you're able to move your elbow up and down or your wrist around without actually moving your shoulders. So these are kind of your anchor points, and we need those to make sure that this part of the image isn't being warped. Because if this image warps, something like this, then it looks weird with the background. We don't want that. We just want this part of the image to move, just these branches down here. Let me extend these keyframes just so that it's really long, and then play through. And this is going to be render intensive. The Puppet tool is render intensive. So if you have a slower computer, this might take a little while for it to render. So I'll render it out, and then we'll see it play through. All right, now it's rendered through. Let me close this layer down. I'll just rename this leaves. And now just select off of that layer so I don't see the pins or anything or the mask. And now just playing through, you see just subtle motion as if, the wind blew that branch. And maybe it's a little too much, actually. We might want to make it a little bit more subtle. In a future lesson, we'll be diving into the Puppet tool a little bit more and showing you how to use it in another real-world project. But this is just sort of a teaser into how that works. All right, so that's enough for this lesson. We added the motion to the photo, panning across, motion to these leaves. Now in the next lesson, we'll use a cool effect to add a little bit of motion to these leaves in the background.